Welcome back here, Goldberg. Today I'll be talking about some of this TradCon activity on Twitter X. People are laying eggs, or rather they have eggs but don't want to use them. They're drying up. What can you do? Our first stop is Jan David Haskins, who is an influencer, and he went somewhat viral of late due to this post where he brags about getting a GF, which, as we know, if you're a white dude, is extremely difficult thing to attain. Just for reference, earlier picture when he was in the trenches, 12-hour days, weed smoker, sin abuser versus loving life, 4-hour work days, sober cigar aficionado. Okay. But this appears to be a normal human being. You could have a regular conversation, at least until he gets to the subject of grimoires or Beijing Biden. Now, with the look he's got, the first thing I thought was 70s dirtbag cop that's on the take or homosexual adult entertainer. Something about the mustache, the condescension, the thin-skinned nature in the comments, lashing out at people. They're going, "Why are you mixing?" He's like, "My recessed genes will live on. You'll be a dead end. You hate happiness." Much akin to Anthony, "It was only just a dream," Johnson. That same weird dude anger they all seem to exude. But let's look at his post. Enough of this discussion. I was quote unquote single for 4 years. In the last 14 months, I moved to Austin, found a good church. I think he's actually starting a church, and joined community and created it too. Then at a pool party I wasn't expecting to meet anyone at and just have fun with my bros, I meet this beauty. A thick and juicy Latina was desperate for my attentions. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't typically associate pool party in Austin with trad women. Doesn't smack of that. Maybe smacks of something else that's jiggling and uncovered, but let's be real. There was a guy quoting this post and he said, "Why do so many cream cheese males lack the ability to detect when a Latina is a hoe?" And there's some truth to what he's saying. This one, she has long hair. I don't usually associate that with being a thought, but it could be an exception to the rule. In any case, mestizas in particular are easily the most hypergamous and loose of Spanish women. And there's obviously going to be some that are not, but the point being, and this is where I'll go into something of a rabbit trail. My theory as to why so many right-wing men in the West have embraced Russian Orthodoxy is because Russia has a large Asiatic population, and it makes them feel better when they're opting for that Filipina trad wife. Much like the guys who say that they're based Catholic and then they get a trad Latina. You probably don't know what a trad Latina is. The one that's super flirtatious, that's grinding on you at the dance floor or being super open. She might be trad in the sense that she's easier to deal with than an Anglo biatch type, but she is very likely started at a young age. I was dating a Latina, I was like 21, she was 19, and she had a cousin that was maybe 11 or 12 who supposedly had already started smashing. Sad to hear that. I don't know how much that's the mainstream, but you got to realize there's pluses and minuses to it all. Usually the religious types, the actual conservative ones, I'm not going to say they're homely, but they're not typically the ones that are the sexiest, and they are somewhat standoffish. So I remember talking to this, she was a white Mexican, and if you even slightly complimented her, she was already, "Oh, what are your intentions towards me? Where do you see us in 5 years?" Like, I barely even met you yet, right? Or the store that I go to sometimes, a Latin market, family run. The daughter is always with a floor-length dress, arms covered. It goes up to the neck. There's a blouse underneath. Super conservative. This is not the type of, oh, waiting for a passport, bro. She's been just preserving her purity. Not exactly. This one he's with could be an exception. It's hard to say. Just know the market you're in and don't get finagled, because far too many men, that's precisely what happens to them. What's interesting about this post, though, he's not married. He hasn't been with her for 10 years. They have a trad family. He's just started dating. This reminds me of the guy in the Think Before You Sleep comment section. "I've been dating a girl for 2 weeks. I'm no longer black-pilled." Like, dude, that's not the point. Or that TikTok Indian guy, "I went out on a date." I mean, all right, good for you, people, but that's not really what we're trying to get at. If you're flexing on inkwells or doomers, whatever you choose, with "I got in a relationship," This is something that in the early 2000s or 90s would have been the norm. Frankly, even today, in some cases, it's the norm. And he's a white dude that got with a mestiza. So, wow. This is what you're trying to hold over the heads of dudes who are just speaking truth to power on what's going on with women today. Your father, your grandfather would have had no problem getting the equivalent, and probably of their own kind, in the past. But this relatively mundane achievement is now everyone's applauding it like it's some unreachable position. Let's begin to advance here. Jan David Haskins, his main claim to fame is helping a bunch of men overcome prawn addiction, and that's a good cause, I suppose. Although there's reasons why I believe men are gooning, and we'll get into it later in the video, that might be connected to some of this trad nonsense. Quick stop here. Normie McDonald. This is one of those religious influencers. God plus country, 500-pound deadlift. Yeah, and what does he have to say? Here he's attacking Millennial Blackpill, who's a cool brother. Check out his YouTube channel. Blackpill Hope here was calling out the fact that Riley Reid, a degenerate prawn star, was able to find a husband and have her kid like everything's normal. And this guy goes, if you pay attention to it, most inquel logic stems from the desire of retribution and vengeance, having no room whatsoever for redemption or morality. Yeah, who knows if Riley Reid actually got married in the church? It might just be a civil contract. But there's enough equivalents that are welcomed with open arms. The saving grace of Jesus, and the Muslim cells do it too. In fact, I think maybe last year there was a girl who was OnlyFans or a prawn star and she wanted to become a hijabi. They were like, welcome, sister, Allah saves. What? And you ask, all right, it's an important element to religion if you want to grow that you take the downtrodden. But don't you think degenerate men and women who suddenly want to join a church should be relegated to some restrictions? You're not getting married. You're not going to have a leadership position. You're just going to sit there and work on yourself and do your penance. Or would that potentially scare away the degenerate types who love coming to church once they've screwed their life up? I do have a problem with that. I think a lot of men do too. It really doesn't have to be men per se. If there was a woman who's very devout and you see this and you're going, why would I want to be part of a church that puts these people on the same level as someone who's actually tried to stay true? And now we get to the crucial point. Audrey here, who is a trad wife, says she's in a lot of private Christians women's groups on Facebook, and the amount of women coming forward about their husband's prawn addictions is heartbreaking. It's supposedly destroying these marriages. And then another post, she says, women are allowed to not be in the mood for sex and say no to their husbands, and they're not in sin for doing so. Andrew Wilson, who is, some people say yeah, he married a single mom. He may not even be religious. It might be a LARP. But he pointed this out. It doesn't take a detective to figure out what's going on here. And that made many a female, especially the trad ones, quite upset. We should consider the fact that when most people are looking at this whole dilemma of women withdrawing affection from their husband, they're probably not assuming, oh, she just had a baby, the man still wants to smash, or she has a migraine, she's exhausted on a particular day because the kids were sick or screaming, and she doesn't want to do it. Withdrawal of affection is often a prolonged process of weeks or months that they're doing with some kind of manipulative or malicious intent behind it. It's not just randomly occurring out of the ether, even though they might want to make you believe that. And when a man's confronted with that situation, are you surprised that maybe he's electing to watch prawn? I wouldn't be shocked, by the way, if these men, on average, are watching the type of content that allows them to recapture that sense that she's in love with them and she's servicing them, not necessarily the corny acting or the degeneracy. There are probably some that they started young, so they're in that latter category. Even saying that, of course, is offensive. And here, Wilson was going, if she doesn't give you a firm commitment before marriage to sleep with you post marriage, don't marry her. Discuss it ahead of time. Very sensible advice. Here, our good TradCon friend comes in. The guy who runs around demanding that women owe him sexual congress will conveniently never agree that it is his responsibility to ensure his own sexual attractiveness. And this would raise a question. Yeah, if you're a guy, you shouldn't get a pot belly and losing your hair, that's up to whether you want to spend money to maintain it. So yeah, you should strive, At the same time, are these women marrying guys who they're not attracted to because they just want to pay out? In fact, some women, one of them in a MAGA hat, was rage pilling about this and said they see us as prostitutes, i.e., these men. Well, in the case that you married a guy you didn't have any genuine desire for, you should be on demand because you are basically are a prosy. Because if you desire a man, you shouldn't have this attitude. You're just gonna, oh, I don't feel like it for months. That's abuse of one form or another. And if this guy is trying to be super dad, making the money and taking care of the kids and fixing things in the house, and you just feel like, well, he doesn't deserve it, or I need to force him to behave a different way, you are basically telling us that the whole Christian trad act is just that. It's a facade, it's a charade, and you're no different than any other woman. Here, Lady Vulgaris says, when you look like this, you really do need to nail down that sexual contract with your mail order bride. Does he look that bad, though? I mean, for his age, still got a full head of hair. His face is somewhat symmetrical. Maybe the eyes are off. Notice how they don't want to be objectified. They immediately attack your looks, or they'll attack something else, your manhood, your capacity. In fact, right here, responding to that same earlier post, so brave of you to tell the world you suck in bed. Yeah, see, there we go. This, if you ever heard that stat, 65% of hetero women aren't getting off, I think that's nonsense. We're not in the 1950s where Don Draper's harumphing for 30 seconds, then going to sleep, and she's left feeling lonely. Religious men are very likely going down on their wives and doing all this stuff. This is anecdotal, but the senior citizen brother I used to work with, he claimed in the late 60s, early 70s, sisters stopped going for brothers for a bit because brothers considered going down on a woman to be homosexual behavior. And so the sisters were trying to get with white dudes who were more open to it, and then the brothers had to adapt. I don't know if that's true. I'm just pointing out that it is far more mainstream. People, even if they are religious, are going to be sexually liberated on a scale. I wouldn't be surprised if some of these Muslim cells are taking their women up the weehee, honestly. You know, the girls are doing that before they get married with non-Muslim men, so wouldn't be that hard to guess at. The only way I would take that stat seriously on them not getting off is if, one, we go back to they're marrying men they're not attracted to, or secondarily, they're going for top tier men who have so many options. Those guys are like, look, I'm here for what I want. But that would be her problem, not the guy she's married to. And it just goes back to the same thing. When some of these conservative women I've seen on Twitter, they get offended if they say you shouldn't ask about body count because it's degrading. Well, if you're actually conservative and religious, it shouldn't be offensive because unless you were widowed or you really met a total manipulator actor, you should be saving yourself for marriage. If you're not doing that and you're playing the same game as the liberal female, then what exactly are you bringing to the table? You vote for Trump? That makes you a trad woman? I don't know if I agree with it. Furthermore, female anatomy is not that complicated. If you're willing to learn, you're going to be able to get them off, unless you're totally repulsive, but in that case, you're probably going to be in a prison cell. They just like floating this over the heads of pliant beta males who want to feel that they're better than these inkwell men. And that's a funny one, too. You'll hear them say, my son's joined Inkwell, the Inkwell movement. There's no political organization. It's just a relative status you might be in. And frankly, if you disagree with them, you'll be given that term, regardless of whether you're married with a wife that is affectionate or you have a girlfriend or not. So technically, you could be some soy liberal that says what they want to hear, but is actually a TFLer, but they'll say you're not one of those. The only organized element I'm aware of is that kimchi cell that was on a StarCraft server trying to launch a revolution against Korean women, but I don't know if that's going to go anywhere. Getting back to the point, you can get a woman off, but that's not a guarantee she's going to stay with you if she has a longer term view, if she's trying to extract certain behaviors from you, if she's trying to move on, or you could be technically Mr. Great Dad and focus too much on the kids, and she'll say you're abusing her. Radfem Hitler agrees with this. The wife has to be the priority over the children even, which sounds kind of ridiculous given how children are and how vulnerable they can be in the world today. But that's the perspective. I've met at least a couple of guys got divorced because their wife felt she was being neglected by him trying to raise the kids. So you see the mentality, even though you've created a new life, you're responsible for, I still need to be your main fixation. Do with it as you will. If you find a good girl, that's fantastic. Hopefully it works out. I hope that this John David Haskins guy is successful. I'm just saying a lot of this framing and the attacks on Andrew Wilson, when you start digging, you'll just see these religious women are the same as the liberal and the secular ones. They just like the facade that puts them in a different category. But the reality is, many, not all, but many are on the carousel and they're doing the same strategies of abuse towards their husband. So you have to weigh whether you want to go that direction or not. It's a personal decision.